dignity of each and every one of us. So today we invite you to a meeting with Christiane Florin and Doris Wagner. I thank them both for being with us today. The interview will be conducted in German and translated into English, Italian, Spanish, and French. To choose the appropriate language, please click on the globe icon in the bottom bar of your screen and select the available language.
Also das Einzige, was bereits gesagt wurde, wiederhole ich nochmal. Wenn ihr Italienisch hören wollt, müsst ihr Portugiesisch anklicken.
Hatten wir, Entschuldigung, hatten wir kein, ich muss Sie ja noch vorstellen, Frau
Sorry,
Florin.
I still have to introduce Miss
Genau, sollen wir noch
Florin.
das Video, bekommen wir noch ein Video zu sehen?
Do we
das war
want to
ursprünglich geplant,
see
oder
the
sollen
video?
wir
We planned for the
direkt in
video.
die Vorstellung gehen?
Or should we start with the introduction right away? Oh, I'm sorry, Susanna says. Steph?
Yes, we're having a few technical issues with the video, so maybe we start and we can show the video at the end. I apologize.
Okay. Also auch von meiner Seite allen ein ganz herzliches
A very warm
Morgen.
welcome also on my part.
Ich freue mich sehr über dieses
I'm
Treffen. Ich bin
delighted
Doris
that we have
Reisinger,
this meeting. My name is
vielen
Doris
besser bekannt unter
Reisinger.
meinem Namen
Most
als
of you
Autorin
know
Doris
me
Wagner,
as
Theologin und
Doris
Philosophin.
Wagner. I'm a theologian and
Ich habe über
philosopher.
meine eigene Missbrauchsgeschichte geschrieben,
I've written about
auch
my
über
own
sexuellen und
history of
spirituellen
abuse
Missbrauch in
and
der
also
Kirche
about sexual and
und
spiritual
bin
abuse
als
in
Autorin auch
Catholic
schon von
Church.
Christiane Florin
And as
interviewt
an author,
worden.
I've also
Deswegen
been
heute freut
interviewed
mich
by
das besonders,
Christiane
dass wir die
Florin.
Rollen
So
gewissermaßen umdrehen.
it's
Es ist mir
fun
eine
that
ganz
today
große Freude,
we're
Christiane
changing
Florin vorstellen
roles.
zu
It's a very
dürfen,
special pleasure for me
denn
to
sie hat
introduce and
mich
interview
und
Christiane Florin
zweifellos viele andere
because
Frauen
she has played a decisive role
eine
for
ganz
me,
entscheidende Rolle
as
dabei
well as for
gespielt, dass ich
countless
mich als
other
Frau in meiner
women and
Kirche heute
men, in
selbstbewusster
making me,
verhalte.
as a woman in my
Christiane Florin
church,
hat in
more
Bonn und Paris
self-confident than my
Politik,
church
Geschichte und
socialization
Musikwissenschaft
would allow
studiert.
for.
Sie ist
Christiane
Journalistin,
Florin studied
Radioredakteurin
politics, history, and
und
musicology in Bonn. She's
Lehrbeauftragte
a
an der Uni
journalist, radio
Bonn, und im
editor, and a
deutschen
lecturer at the
Sprachraum muss ich
University of
Christiane
Bonn.
Florin eigentlich
And
gar
in the
nicht vorstellen,
German-speaking world,
denn
she
sie ist
doesn't
hier
need
als
any
scharf
introduction.
analysierende und
She's
spitz
best known
formulierende
as a
Autorin
sharply
mit ihrem eigenen
analyzing and
Blog
sharply
bestens
formulating
bekannt.
author with her
Der
own blog.
Markenkern von Christiane Florin
Her
ist es,
brand
innerhalb der
essence
katholischen
is to
Kirche
ask
konsequent
questions within
und
the
hartnäckig
Catholic Church
und in
in a
einem
consistent
unverwechselbaren
and
Stil
persistent
Fragen zu
way,
stellen, die in der Politik
unmistakable
ganz
style,
selbstverständlich
which
wären.
would be very natural in
Fragen zur
politics.
Legitimität kirchenrechtlicher
Questions about
Regeln,
the
Fragen
legitimacy
zur
of
persönlichen
canonical
Verantwortung
rules
von
and the
Bischöfen für
personal
ihr offensichtliches
responsibility of bishops for
Leitungsversagen.
their obvious
Und Bischöfe
leadership
sind auf solche
failures.
Fragen in der Regel nicht
And bishops
vorbereitet.
usually are not prepared for
Daran merken
such
wir, dass in der Kirche
questions.
eben doch nicht dieselben Regeln gelten wie in der
And
Politik.
this
Und
is to
zwar
show
auch und
that
gerade dann
in the
nicht, wenn es um
church we don't have
Frauenrechte
the
geht.
same rules like in politics,
Darüber, warum
especially when
das
it
so
comes to
ist und warum
women's
das anders
rights.
sein sollte, hat
So
Christiane
why
Florin
this came
2017
about
ein
and
wichtiges Buch
why this should
geschrieben.
change,
Sein
this is
Titel
what
Der
Christiane
Weiberaufstand,
Florin
warum
wrote a
Frauen in der
book
katholischen
about.
Kirche mehr Macht
The
brauchen.
title is Women's
Liebe Christiane
Uprising.
Florin, ich darf Sie jetzt bitten, mit Ihrer
And
Keynote
Christiane
zu beginnen.
Florin, I would now like to start with your keynote. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here with you and have so many participants here from all over the world. This is a premiere for me as well, because usually I speak in the German language regions. The key topic of this keynote is power. And you're going to understand, I hope, why the topic of hope is so dear to me. It is so important because I have the feeling that the question what power consists of and how it is exercised, many people don't have an answer to that question because being Catholic is so much of a feeling. So I will explain what power is about if knowledge is power, if humor can be power, and the shortest chapter is the to-do, so the fields of action. So I believe that first of all, you have to analyze, you have to consider, you have to ponder before becoming active. So what does the power consist of? I'm currently in Bonn at home. I work in Cologne. And I believe that Cologne Cathedral is very well known. The Cologne Cathedral is one of the most visited buildings in the world. And last year, a Cologne newspaper ran the headline, I quote, "This has never been seen before. Revolution in Cologne Cathedral," end of quote. And I thought, oh, Cologne gets a female archbishop. What else could be a sensation or revolution in Cologne? The current archbishop is called Rainer Maria Wölki. So I thought, okay, we get an archbishop, a Maria without a Rainer in front of her name. So you believe if that was the case, you would have known. It is what was not the case. The revolutionary sensation was that female beadles, the so-called Domschweizer, were to be allowed to join the cathedral. So the Domschweizer beadles are people who make sure that no one in the cathedral misbehaves. So for a year, there have been also female beadles, the Domschweizerinnen, and they wear the same shabby red capes like the men. And it sounds like a local news story, but the reason behind this step has to do with our topic, with power. The reason behind this is world classic Catholic. The provost of the cathedral said, "We believe that women and men could complement each other well in this activity, as they already do in other areas of work in the cathedral, in the sacristy, in the treasury, and in climbing the tower." The most important word here is not climbing the tower. The important term here is complete. If men and women complete each other, everything is okay. Complementarity is the buzzword here. And that means complementarity, completion is stated. And this is something that comes up in different documents of the church. Where men and women complete each other, they are equal. But basically, an hierarchical relationship is stated here. Because for what is missing and what is to be completed by the woman, that is determined, of course, by the consecrated man. If he, the man, has the power, the woman complements humility. You know, you have to complement a lot of humility. If he speaks, she completes the smile. You know, women always have to be diplomatic and charming. And if he gives, she says, "Thank you." And if he gives nothing, she thanks anyway. For a long time, women were called other beings. Let me show you the book, Other Beings, of Theresia Heimat. She describes the history, how long it took until women were called women. They were called other beings in the past. And it means that the man is the norm and the woman is the deviation. Men define what a woman is, how she has to be, and in what radius she has to move. Men know the natural, or within the church, the God-given role of women. And they take care that a woman does not fall out of this role. If it falls out of this role, she's abroad and not an appreciated woman. And to come back to the female beadles, the Domschweizerinnen, the example is to show a very popular hierarchical trick. Women are granted with great fanfare. You know, there was a lot of media coverage when it came to the female beadles. So a lot of great fanfare for something they've never demanded. Because I cannot remember that there would have been a major movement of female beadles in the Catholic Church. They get something that they never asked for, but they are denied the self-evident equality. Women must not take anything. They may only accept, writes Simone de Beauvoir. And of course, she's part of my portfolio. And I can only recommend to everybody to read this book. It's really an eye-opener. It has been fighted against from Catholic Church. It's from 1949. It's an old book, but it's a really comprehensive description of power relation and systems, not only in Catholic Church, but in many societies. So women must not take anything. They may only accept. And in Catholic Church, they may hope for a patronizing clergy. This is the basic order. The clergy can grant or not grant. So there are these two options. Some of them always say no, and others say, "May I show you my women advancement plans?" In the past, Seducer said, "May I show you my stamp collection?" Today, the clergy says, "May I show you my women's advancement plan?" And so we can't say no. Self-determination in the sense of enlightenment is not provided for in this system of role assignment. In the Catholic teaching, you do not find the term of self-determination. Roland Rising described that very well when it came to spiritual abuse. If I don't have a positive view on self-determination, it's easy to be abused. So a woman is not self-determined, she has a destiny. The teaching authority determines which one that destiny is. And if you understood that basic situation, it also becomes clear why emancipation movements are considered an intimidation or a threat, because they endanger the gender order and thus the church order. The secular idea of equal rights, equal dignity, equal rights has basically never arrived in Catholic Church. It has never been received in a positive way. If you take a look at the documents of the church and listen to what they say, how bishops talk about gender justice and equality, you see that equality always means egalitarianism or masculinization. Important term with regard to John Paul II. But equal rights, gender justice does not mean that a woman wants everything that churchmen have, but it means that she can have the desire to have it and does not have to forbid herself to want it just because she is a woman. So sometimes you hear the term gender justice, but it's basically not been understood. And now you can say, well, it's not that bad after all, that's the tradition. You know, there are so many things that women can do even without ordination and ministry. That is true. But this case, you somehow swing the incense burner over real existing power. And, with all that smoke, you don't any longer see the crucial point. If somebody always tells me, you may only sit here and not there, you may only move within this radius and not beyond it, and just because I'm not a man, then he exercises power, and in this case, a discriminating power. No matter how nicely he smiles at the same time, and how much he raves about women, another typically Catholic trick. Francis is particularly good at this. He raves about women, and his positive examples are always women, preferably dead women. But you have to do justice to women on earth. This is the important thing. To praise dead women, that's easy. Dignity consists in being allowed to think in different ways, independent from your gender or sex, independent from your social strata that you come from. And to give a clear assigned role to women, that is a contradiction in terms, especially if we assert at the same time equality. And women are discriminated against in the church. And this way of behaving like an usher is not individual. It is not the individual behavior of some hardline bishop. It's structural. It's a structural problem. And yet again, another dimension is that a debate about women who want something is always a debate about men who have something. Men should share power. This is something you experience also in the secular world when it comes to equality. Men have to share. There's more competition for them. But the ushers in Catholic Church, they do not even admit that they are ushers, that they are active in this role, but they present themselves as instruments of the Lord. John Paul II, as you probably all know, in 1994 did not decide that women should not become priests. It was decided, very important, words of power are oftentimes shown in gestures of powerlessness, because power is not shouted out in Catholic Church, but people say, well, God is speaking through me, I can't do it differently, I have to do it this way. Powerlessness. And women's uprising means, first of all, that women rise from this place that was assigned to them, or even for the better, that they don't take it at all, and that they think about themselves in other way than in those ways that are intended for them. This leads me to the second aspect. So this is a difficult thing for women. Women have difficulties with power. When my published was booked in 2017, I thought the most opposition will be created by the German word Weib, meaning broad. It's a curse word, it's a swear word. But things turned out differently. More than the word Weib, broad, the subtitle created way more criticism. Why women need more power in Catholic Church. Power, that is an emotive word in all political camps in the church. And in many reviews I read, well, there is no power in Catholic Church. Everything is service. Or in right-wing Catholic portal I found, Catnet, well, she only wants power for herself. And as children we said, well, you're stupid yourself. Especially women react allergic to the term power. A few years ago, the Catholic German Women's Association, KFD, struggled for quite some time whether it should choose the motto Women Power Church. It then had to endure that bishops looked angry at them because they used the word power, and they said, so please, ladies, it was said, power is really not the issue, not for us, and certainly not for you. Many female Catholics, this is my impression, believe that power is something dirty, and this is what we have been told. And some think they are better, they are cleaner, they emphasize their feminine spirituality, their feminine charism, whatever those might be, but they support, perhaps without wanting to, the argumentation of Josef Ratzinger. Already in 2004, in a letter to the bishops when he was prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, he warned women against striving for power. He said, power for men is terrible, but for women it's even worse. And he himself was, of course, just a simple worker in the vineyard of the Lord, a giant in humility, because the powerful in the church never say that they have power, and women should think power is something dirty. I should not have power. I studied political science, as Doris Wagner said, and you take a look at how power is legitimized and how it is controlled, if there's checks and balances. Power is something that is simply there, and you have to shape and organize power. This is the basis of constitution, that power is distributed. Power is not something bad, and it is dangerous in a social relationship, and above all also in an institution, not to talk about power. Because if I deny power, I cannot distinguish the good use of power from the abuse of power. Max Weber, he was a Protestant, Lutheran person. He said 100 years ago, I quote, just because something is called a service does not mean that there is no domination, end of quote. And theology was for the longest time speechless on the subject of power. And the very few who were not speechless, Hans Kühn, Eugen Drewermann, they were silenced within the church. And I call that brutality of humility. They were silenced by those who said, I don't have power at all. And in more general terms, I would say that if you don't talk about power, this is the best condition for creating victims. This system of power produces until today victims. Women's uprising thus means raising awareness, getting clear that the Catholic Church is a ruling system. Not only, I wouldn't say that either, but it is also a ruling system. And women's uprising means also to become sensitive to the suffering that this rule brings with it, independent from the fact whether I'm a victim myself, if I'm affected myself, but becoming clear that this system produces suffering in a systematic way, to be vigilant for the many situations in which power is exercised in the parishes up to the Vatican, for the many situations in which power is exercised and abused, oftentimes in a camouflaged way. You can recognize situations like these by imperatives. That's your role, bear your fate. Take an example from Mary, God wants it that way. Power, and this is the specialty, is a complex event. It is not based solely on command and obedience, on coercion and punishment. And especially the exercise of religious power always depends on a dose of voluntariness. I'm not supposed to notice that I'm doing something because someone else wants me to do it. I should get the impression I'm doing it for myself, or even better, I'm doing it for God. And I'm always amazed how difficult it is for adult women to discard this submissive behavior. Female professors often act like communion children as soon as a high cleric enters the room. Many female Catholics internalize humility in such a way that they consider abnormal behavior to be normal, behavior that they would no longer accept elsewhere, in politics, for example. In fact, however, we as women make ourselves a dominated sex. We participate in that. And women's uprising means to awake the spirit of contradiction wherever I am. This is not taught in Catholic education, because I was raised Catholic also, and I did not certainly learn it. Jesus was allowed to contradict authorities. Mary was not allowed to do so. And the discussion among women in the Catholic Church is in many ways reminiscent of the discussion about the women's suffrage in the 19th century. Also, at the time, the positions among women were by no means uniform. This is not necessary. We don't have to have the same opinion just because we are all women, but there are aspects that might join forces, like being treated equally. So there were those who said politics is not for women. They do not need the right to vote, neither actively or passively. There were those who said, I would like to vote, but women should not put themselves up for election. A parliament is not a place for them, with the stage and the speeches and so on. Especially many female Catholics thought that, many Catholic associations, and there were those, for example, the writer Hedwig Dohm, who angrily declared, we simply want what men take for granted. Not more, but not less, regardless of whether you want to go into politics yourself or not. And this is a central thought. I can decide for myself that I don't want to have anything to do with power games. But if I say power is not for women, then I block access to power for all other women, simply on the basis of gender. And that is precisely the situation in the church. Women say, well, power, I don't want to have power. Power is not okay. And it's okay to say, I don't want to have power for myself. But you have to be clear that you partake in a game that blocks access to power for other women. So women eagerly participate in blocking access for other women. There's hardly any solidarity, partly because small differences are made great and the great injustice is made small. According to the motto, it is not so bad, I don't want to become a priestess anyway, and I'm not discriminated against. Women also like to tell others how they should behave. In other words, they should be charming, diplomatic, not angry, and not sharp-tongued. And the men can sit back and relax because they can watch women ruin each other. You see that in political debates also, but you see that also in Catholic Church. And so in this way, women themselves reinforce an asymmetry. If nothing changes, possibilities are blocked. But if something changes, what is lost? For those who say, I don't want things to change, women told me that they don't have a feeling of celebrating high mass with a woman standing at the altar. Okay, well, these women will continue to find priests for this feeling, even in a church that is based on gender equality. They don't actually lose anything, but they are the ones who complain the loudest. Talking about feeling of celebrating high mass, women make many humiliating experiences in the church. And some try to escape this rule by carving out a niche for themselves. You know, their little Catholic home. The praise of the niche is part of Catholic conditioning. I only need a niche in a dictatorship. If the system is okay, I don't need a niche because I have options to object. And you present a false alternative if you say either freedom on a small scale in my niche or struggle for freedom on the big stage, because we need both niche inhabitants and angry fighters, and they should not be incited against each other. But they are. Many women who withdraw into a shelter or a niche, they get the impression that they are an individual case. And this is part of the exercise of power, because then women think there's something wrong with them. But the discrimination, the injustice is something objective. It is not a subjective feeling. If one would treat people with a different skin color so ignorantly and so arrogantly in such a discriminating way, one would be a racist. If one treats the person opposite in such a way because she's a woman, then you are a Catholic. Women's uprising is thus, or means thus, to call discrimination what it is, discrimination. And if I read everything out that I prepared, I will not stick to my time limit. So let me move on to the next chapter. In Germany, there is a saying, knowledge is power. If I look around, I see many women sitting in front of bookshelves. We want to know things, we want to learn things. We are characterized by the idea, if you know something, if you acquire education, you can partake in something. And in some areas, this is true. Women's uprising means also to be able to contradict in a qualified way. I'm not a theologian, but the more church history and theological knowledge I acquired, the more I noticed how the teaching authority take me for a fool. If I take as an example the current reasons for excluding women from priesthood, it is said, well, Jesus was a man, the apostles were men, and the apostles were apparently the first priests. They were ordained already in a certain way. So these arguments, these so-called arguments, first appeared in the 1970s of the 20th century. And at the time, they were considered at least controversial, if not refuted. So they don't have a long tradition, but they were invented after the women's movement focused on female identity. Only after women say we want to have equal rights, the Catholic teaching authorities realized that Jesus was a man and that it was so important, that one of his characteristics, and the main characteristic, was that he was a man. Because you can ask yourself, why did they have to find these new arguments or invent them? You know, if you dig deeper, and you don't have to dig very deep, you find the reason. The reason is because what the church had claimed for centuries became embarrassing for them in the 20th century, because the main argument for almost 2,000 years was not that Jesus was a man. Well, it was clear that Jesus was a man. You didn't have to underline that. They stated and claimed that women are not that equal like men, that they are seducers, unclean, they are suspects. They are sexually loaded. And Thomas Aquinas, the church teacher, could only explain the conception of a girl by the fact, as he said, that at the time of the sexual acts, unfavorable winds must have blown. So we are not talking about the fact that women were a little worse off than men. We are talking about a long history of discrimination, devaluation, and the contempt of the feminine. So it is of no use to dig out a couple of powerful abysses from church history. If the church does not change the result of this contempt, if no pope or no prefect speaks the sentence, men and women are equal, without any but. But if the gentlemen always add a but, then they continue this history of contempt. Even if they don't say publicly today that women are inferior, there's still this argument behind. And then a pope like John Paul II can still rave so much about the genius of women. That discrimination remains. You know, so I experienced several years of debate. So I don't give into the illusion that in the Catholic Church, the better arguments and sound knowledge count. Stupidness is power, because it is called Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith and not Congregation for Plausibility. Debates are decided by the word of power, si ordinatio sacerdotalis, not by persuasion. The powerful are not sovereign enough to correct themselves. The more theologians provide evidence that the gospel demands equality of the sexes, that it is not only forbidden, but that it is a given, the more intellectually scarce the doctrinal argumentation becomes. There is no conclusive proof why sacramentality is linked to the male genitals. Why among the many characteristics that Jesus had, his masculinity should have been so formative that it is the most important criterion that you have to fulfill. That cannot be conclusively justified. So in interviews, I always ask clerics why for the office, for the ministry, the gender should be more important than lifestyle, because Luke says, whoever wants to be my disciple should renounce to all possessions. Jesus was without possession, but this was not established as a role model. The role model is Jesus was a man. And anyone who enters into this debate that shouldn't take place anymore since 1994 quickly realizes that this is a world of madness, a world of ideology. The quote of a bishop that has died since, I quote, he says, "It is more likely that pigs learn to fly than that women are ordained." This is really such a stupid phrase, but it's more noticeable that there was no contradiction. And a Roman Catholic blogger lectured me immediately after the publication of my book, well, women can have children and men can become priests. And at first I did not see any link, but now I know. It is about childbearing envy. The ordination compensates for the childbearing envy, and women who want to be equal, they develop something like an envy of ordination. So this is the psychological argumentation behind it. And there is no sign that the controversy will be decided in the future by intellectual persuasion or that knowledge is power. Nevertheless, it is important not to give up. It is important to sit with the back to our bookshelves, to read, to analyze, to argue. So if you run your head against the wall in the church, the problem is not your head, but the wall. And as a last aspect, I wrote down way too many things. Maybe you can tell from what I say. I take this institution seriously. I observe it. I describe it. I read the relevant document. And some of the texts that I read emanate violence, especially those that speak of the destiny of women. On the other hand, these thoughts of power would deprive me of sleep if I did not preserve a sense of the satirical side of the institution. Because the clergy is often screamingly unjust and screamingly funny. For example, if Cardinal Burke declares that a few years ago that the church suffers from feminization and that men are frightened by the multitude of women. You know, it makes you laugh because he loves to wear robes with lace. So visually, you could say he contributes a lot to feminization. Or another example, last year in Freiburg, the German Archdiocese, a new auxiliary bishop was consecrated, and women were demonstrating outside, claiming gender equality. And what did he do? He gave a ball of wool to the women as a gift to symbolize that the thread of conversation, as we say in German, should not break off. I didn't know if I should laugh or cry about it. If an adult man gives a ball of wool to adult women, and you have to observe this thing, you have to describe this thing, especially in protests, the tension comes up and becomes clear. How things are tangled up becomes clear. You know, women are approached, women are dealt with. There's a video going around by Francis where he says of the integration of women. So women are still the other beings, and it reminds me of a psychological experiment when you want to make sure that women don't have are not afraid of spiders anymore. You know, so you have them watch a spider in a glass, and the therapy was successful if the spider could come out and walk over the woman's arm. I think in Catholic Church, a lot of men need therapy. They treat the woman like the spider in the glass. They make sure that the lid is tightly closed, and they consider what is dangerous about the being sitting in the glass. And who's got the problem? The spiders or the man sitting around the glass with the spider? And it also means sarcasm, to mock or to be ironic, but not cynical, because the system is already cynical. Thank you for your attention.
Ja, vielen, vielen Dank, Christiane Florin.
Thank you so much,
Wir
Christiane
haben jetzt noch
Florin.
ungefähr eine Viertelstunde Zeit, wenn ich
We
das
still
richtig
have
sehe.
15 minutes left.
Ich würde also direkt zu den Fragen
And I would
übergehen.
like to move on straight to the questions.
Wenn ich Ihnen zuhöre,
When I listen
und
to
ich denke,
you,
das geht vielen Frauen so,
and I think
dann
this goes for many other women
merkt man
too,
erst, wie
you
normal
realize
die Diskriminierung von
how
Frauen in unserer
normal
Kirche ist und wie wir das
discrimination
auch alle
is
als
in our
irgendwie
church, and
selbstverständlich und
how
gegeben
we
hinnehmen,
consider that as
so lange. Es scheint, wir
granted,
werden rein
as normal.
sozialisiert in dieses System,
We are socialized into the
übernehmen
system
das als normal,
and consider it as normal.
ja. Wir gewöhnen uns daran, unseren Platz zu akzeptieren.
We get used to accepting our space.
Und es braucht so etwas wie einen Aufwachmoment,
And
um
we
zu
need a
realisieren,
moment
dass
of
wir
waking up,
tatsächlich
an
diskriminiert werden. Dass Sie
awakening
haben
to
vorhin gesagt,
realize
nicht
that we
über
are
Macht sprechen ist
discriminated
gefährlich.
against. You said if we
Es
don't speak
braucht so
about
etwas wie
power,
einen
it is dangerous.
Aufwachmoment, um das
So
zu
it needs a
realisieren.
moment of awakening to
Und für
understand
viele
that.
Frauen scheint der
For
Aufwachmoment
many
darin zu
women, this
bestehen, dass
moment
sie
of awakening
Machtmissbrauch
is
selbst erleben
the
oder
fact that
Menschen
they
kennen,
experience
die
power,
diesen
the
Machtmissbrauch
abuse of
erlebt
power,
haben.
or
Ich
they
glaube, dass es
know
eine
people
Verknüpfung
who
gibt
were
zwischen der
abused by the
Missbrauchskrise
power. So there is a connection
und
between
der
the
Bewegung von
scandal
Frauen,
of
die
abuse and
Gleichberechtigung
the
in der Kirche
movement
fordern.
of women claiming equal
Ähm,
rights in Catholic
d-
Church.
Für mich persönlich war dieser
For me personal,
Aufwachmoment, als ich
this
selbst Gewalt in der
moment
Kirche
of
erlebt habe. Und ich
awakening
habe
was when I experienced
gestaunt in
violence
den Jahren,
within
nachdem
the
ich mein Buch
church.
veröffentlicht habe, wie
And
viele
after I
Frauen
published my book
auch
in the
schon
years
wirklich
after,
Frauen, die sehr viel älter sind als ich,
I
mir
was
von ähnlichen
surprised
Übergriffen
how
erzählt haben, die
many
sexualisierte
many
Gewalt in
women
der Kirche
spoke to
erlebt
me
haben,
about
die
sexualized
übergriffige Fragen im Beichtstuhl erlebt
violence,
haben,
you know,
die
during
erlebt haben, wie Kirche sie
questions that are not
alleingelassen hat
okay
mit
during confessions,
Partnerschaftsgewalt und so weiter.
how the church left them alone with
Und
violence that they experienced
nicht alle
in
Frauen haben
their
solche Erfahrungen
relationships,
gemacht. Und ich
in
frage mich,
their
wenn ich Ihnen
marriage.
zuhöre,
And not
Sie sind
all
als
women made
junge,
those experiences.
intelligente,
And if I listen
selbstbewusste
to
Frau, die
you
Politikwissenschaft
were
studiert hat,
you
katholisch
are
sozialisiert war,
once a young,
Sie haben Ihr Buch Wahrer
intelligent woman.
Aufstand
You
ja auch nicht
studied
mit 20
political
geschrieben.
science. You did not write
Hat es
your
für
book
Sie
at
persönlich
age
auch so
20.
einen Aufwachmoment
So,
gegeben, wo Sie
did you
gemerkt
experience
haben,
this moment of
ups, hier, das, was ich
awakening, where
bis
you
jetzt als
woke up,
normal
where
erachtet
you
habe in meiner Kirche,
realized, so the
ist gar
things
nicht
that I
normal. Es gibt hier
considered
ein
as normal
Problem.
in my church is not normal at all? Was there such a moment for you? I come from a Catholic family, Catholic socialization. You cannot say they were especially conservative. They were just regular Catholics. You go to church. I was in the children's choir. I made a lot of music, youth work. I was on a church-based school, and my experiences were positive. We were very free in what we did in our work, in our commitment to the young people. We lived in that niche. I didn't even know who was the Archbishop of Cologne. It was not relevant for what we did. We celebrated Mass, prepared Mass, discussed, criticized the Pope with the sexual approaches and all of those. That was possible. My moment of awakening was when I dedicated myself to the church on a professional level, when I became a journalist working in the field of the church. And I saw different things, sexualized violence, of course. You know, this is the major topic that I excluded because it's way too large a topic for this context, but also other things where I thought, well, this is abuse. People were under pressure. A debate was silenced. You know, people were not able to teach anymore. Let me go and dig deeper. And what I encountered, what arrogance. This little journalist, what does she want? You don't get any invitations, you don't get answers, people lie to you. You know, it was like in a royal setting, and I knew from different media coverage that people try to camouflage or embellish things. This is not specific for the Catholic Church, but the self-confidence at the Catholic Church that don't have to face certain questions and that functions according to different rules, and there are only very few journalists asking those questions. This was a key moment, and once I had written the first article, Christian Welt, at the time, and there were a situation where people tried to put me under pressure, of course, where people said, well, you know that there's still money and funds from the church that that project is paid with. And I told them, okay, but tell me that I'm wrong. And they were not able. Also, with regard to Theberts van Els, and people told me, well, the way you depict that, please, can you reconsider? And everything was right. It was even worse. And I continue to criticize because I've been working on the topic of sexualized violence for years. And given the crime and the abuse of power and the suffering, everything worked well according to the system of the church. Nobody resigned. Nobody was blamed. And if I had to correct myself, I would do so, but I don't see any need to do so. I don't see that the system of power changed.
Jetzt hat Ihr Buch, als das 2017 erschien,
was
Weiberaufstand,
published in 2017,
zwar sehr schnell sehr viele Leserinnen gefunden, aber das Phänomen, das wir mittlerweile in Deutschland haben, dass Frauen mit Transparenten auf der Straße stehen und demonstrieren, wenn die Bischöfe sich treffen, das hat es 2017 noch nicht gegeben. Was glauben Sie, was ist da dazwischen passiert? Was hat geholfen? Was hat es gebraucht, damit Frauen wirklich buchstäblich auf die Straße gehen?
Women go out on the streets. I do believe that awareness is important. During my first lectures, I realized that women, they came to my lecture, but they did not object openly. All of them had the impression that the abuse of power, not necessarily sexual abuse, but just abuse of power, because they were told, this is about you, you are way too sensitive. So for them, it was important to understand, no, they are not a single case, an individual case, it's a systemic question. So we needed to create awareness for that. And in Women's Uprising, I illustrated everyday situation that every single woman committed to a parish experienced this, being ignored or being spoken down to just because you are a woman. And many women saw themselves depicted in those episodes. And it takes this moment where you see, okay, somebody writes down something that I experienced, but that I would not have been able to put down in these words, connected to information with historical knowledge that I mentioned before, with this hundreds of years of contempt and this contempt remains, and many women were not aware about that. And I also witnessed lectures where women cried, where they were reminded of moments of confessions, and they faced their history and past experiences. I read many novels, when where people talk about the confession, or where the parish priests speak down to women, and where you become clear you are a suspect just because you're a woman. And many became clear about that. And many times people asked me, when I published Women's Uprising, people asked, where's the uprising? And I said, I don't know why there is no uprising. Now we have a small uprising, but it's not enough. The images of protesting women, we did not see them for many, many years. Now we have those images, and this is an advantage because media need images. And it's a good image because we do not protest violently, but we protest with arguments.
Die Frage, die im Raum steht, ist ja auch,
so
was
the question
fehlt denn noch?
Is also what is
Und
missing.
ich erinnere mich an eine Begegnung, die ich erst letzte Woche hatte mit einer Ordensfrau, ich schätze mal um die 80 Jahre war die alt, die mir nach meinem Vortrag sagte, was man mit uns als jungen Schwestern gemacht hat. Das war ja auch Missbrauch. Das darf man ja aber so gar nicht sagen. Und ich habe sie ermutigt und gesagt, nein, reden Sie darüber. Reden Sie über das. Ich glaube, das, was fehlt, das ist meine These, ist, dass Frauen noch viel mehr darüber reden, welche Erfahrungen mit Machtmitteln, also mit Demütigungen, mit Abwertungen, mit Gewalt sie in ihrer Kirche gemacht haben, um Solidarität wirklich zu erzeugen. Sehen Sie das ähnlich?
Would you share that point of view? This is a very important aspect, actually. Not only talk about it, but writing it down. If I now consider how the history of the latest church history would look like, you have these men with their eyes full of tears remembering the Second Vatican Council, but you don't read nowhere about the experiences that women made during the 60s and the 70s. Hardly any article, any story that is so powerful like the other episodes. So a church that makes use of a oral history. The history of the 20th century will be written down as the history of the Second Vatican Council. But the experiences of the women who were abused, etc., those stories will not be written down. And all the stories are written by men. So women don't have the feeling that they are allowed to be angry. It's always about behaving, being charming, nice expressions, especially the religious. You are not allowed to be angry. And I'm angry in many aspects, and you can tell, because if you're angry, you look for the truth. I don't believe that what is sold to us as the truth, that is the truth. You never meet the requirements of the gospel, that is clear. But what is happening there? It's not about not meeting the requirements. It is the opposite of the gospel. And this is something that makes me angry. And all the victims, and I get angry also if I read, well, she's really suffering in the Catholic Church or from the Catholic Church. No, I'm not suffering, but the Church creates suffering for other women. You know, and I wouldn't do my job if I was talking only about my personal experience. So the question about interpretation and what do we write down and what remains from us, this is important. So especially the women who are now 80 or 90 years old, they need to write down their memories. And if they don't do that, or if they don't share it with somebody who then writes it down for them, it will be lost and the history will be written by men only.
Ja, wir haben jetzt noch 3 Minuten.
We have 3
Es tut mir
minutes
wahnsinnig
left.
leid, dass man mich
I'm
nicht hören kann
so
auf Englisch.
sorry that
Ich versuche, eine letzte Frage zu stellen.
In English.
Und noch einmal Ihr Wissen als Politikwissenschaftlerin anzuzapfen. Was wäre denn die Vision, großes Wort, das Ideal, auf das wir hinsteuern? Wie müsste eine Kirche aussehen, damit Machtmissbrauch in der Form, wie speziell Frauen ihn erleben, nicht mehr möglich ist?
That this type of discrimination against women is not possible anymore. Well, this is a major topic, obviously. Basically, this is about a constitution that grants the right to self-determination to every member. So this is an abstract level, and it's important to keep that in mind. And the other aspect is, it is very important to object wherever you are, to object and to say, no, it is not where you state the situation. I have proof. You say something that is not accurate. And for many women, you know, this is difficult to do. But this is the first step. This is why it is so important to me to create a certain basic knowledge and to write that down in an easy language, because this is not something that only goes to theologians, but this is something that can be shared, so the knowledge can be shared by everybody, and then you realize how much stupid things you are told, and we have to object against that. That is important. And yet another point, the solidarity among women, to consider we have a goal that joins us, even though I don't want to become a priestess. No woman in the world wants to be oppressed. No, the church could unfold an incredible potential. You know, so in other parts of the world, if they would only say men and women are equal, and this is our basic creed, they don't do that. So I would like to see the church using their role as a global player, and they don't do that. They adapt to patriarchy. And women should live more solidarity and also join forces with secular feminists and not stay among themselves. So reach out to the world outside, because feminism did not lose importance. The church lost importance, but the oppression of women on a global level, there's a lot of women who would have to fight for their rights and do so sometimes also, but are not able to do so everywhere.
Wir haben 11:30 Uhr. Vielen Dank,
It's
Christiane Florin.
11:30. Thank you so
Wir merken
much,
alle, dass das
Christiane
Thema
Florin.
unendlich ist und wir werden sicher
This
noch oft
is an
auch in diesem Rahmen weitersprechen.
topic, and we will continue to discuss.
Ich hoffe,
of
dass
course.
vielleicht dieses Event heute dazu beigetragen
I
hat, dass
hope
Ihr Buch
this
Weiberaufstand noch in andere
event
Sprachen
could be a
übersetzt
contribution
wird.
to make sure
Wer
that your
weiß,
book,
das wäre sehr wertvoll.
Women's Uprising,
Auch
can
von meiner
also be
Seite danke an
translated
Voices
in
of
additional
Faith
languages.
für die
Thanks to Voices of
Organisation
Faith
und
for organizing this event.
Ihnen allen einen schönen Tag und schönes
And
Wochenende.
enjoy the rest of the day and have a nice weekend, everybody. Thank you. And sorry for talking so long, but the situation is really complicated. Thank you, and thank you for the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants and dear listeners, I would like to thank everybody. I apologize for the technical glitches that we had. I'm Franziska Driesen-Reding. I'm from Zurich, and in Zurich, we do have a church parliament, how we call it, and I'm the president of this parliament. So the church taxes, all the money is distributed by the parliament. This is a step ahead. And on behalf of the Catholic Women's Council, I would like to thank Women's Voices of Faith. And I would like to thank Doris Reisinger and Christiane Florin, these two women that are very dear to me. I don't know if we will be able to watch the film. Stephanie or Susanna, please take on the floor. Thank you so much.
Oops. Thank you, everyone. That concludes the event for today. So as we mentioned, if you'd want to put anything else in the group chat for suggestions, you can do that. But we appreciate you being here, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Doris, Christiane, Franziska, Susanna, and all of our networks around the world. We appreciate all of your support, and thank you to the translators as well. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Ja, danke auch an die Übersetzer. Dankeschön. Ich glaube, es war nicht einfach, das zu übersetzen.
Thank you to the interpreter. I guess it wasn't easy to translate my speech.
It was actually translated really well in English. So I know we had a few technical glitches, so we apologize for that. But thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry for the English.
No, it wasn't your fault, Doris. I don't know why. We were not sure why, actually, because it was fine on all the other channels, but on English, just when you came up, the German and your voice seemed to be the same level, but right. It's a Zoom thing. So it was only on that, so don't worry. We tried to fix it, but we're not sure why. I might look that up afterwards. But thank you, everyone. You can click leave meeting or end. I think leave meeting on the right-hand side